Okay, before we get into this, I got an update for you. I finally got a haircut. I probably let it go, 3 weeks too long. So I'm looking all spiffy for you all. Story follows state. We don't need to change the story. We need to change the state. So often, we buy into the story in our mind. We think it's true, we think it's reality, and as a result, we're living by it. We're just always living in our mind. And I spent a long time in my life functioning like this, just living thought by thought and buying into every single one. And so what commonly happens in therapy is we will try and challenge and change people's thoughts. And I did this earlier in my career, and I still do it a bit now. It can be beneficial. But what'll happen is you'll challenge and change your thoughts. You'll realize your thoughts are distorted, they're irrational, they're catastrophic. And so you move on. You manage to challenge and change them and come up with a more balanced thought. But then the next day, you just wake up and have more fear thoughts or more preoccupation or obsessive thinking. And what's happened is you haven't changed the underlying cause that's resulting in the story in your mind, that's resulting in the fear thoughts or catastrophic thinking that you're having. And that underlying cause is your nervous system. Deb Dana talks about how story follows state. And what she means by this is that neuroception precedes perception. Now, I just said a lot of fancy words, so let me explain this to you. We all know what perception is. This is cognitively what we perceive. This is how we understand the world. And in our society, this is what we kind of live by a lot of the time. But neuroception is something different. Neuroception is the understanding that your nervous system is picking up on cues of safety or danger unconsciously. So we are not aware of it. And neuroception precedes perception, which means that your nervous system is picking up on cues of safety or danger unconsciously, and then we're making up a story around it. So if all of a sudden you shift to a sympathetic state and you're in fight or flight, that story, we're going to come up with a story that makes sense for the state of our nervous system that we're currently in. And so I want to break this down today in understanding this, because we need to understand how the story presents itself in each of the states of our nervous system. Now, I have a polyvagal basics to help you understand the states of the nervous system. And I'll link that to the top here, because if you don't have that information, I'm about to say a bunch of jargony terms that you probably won't know what I'm talking about. So check that out if you haven't already. But when we understand the states of our nervous system, the systems at play, we have ventral vagal, which is when we feel safe, connected, calm, and at ease. We have sympathetic, which is when we're mobilized, we're in fight or flight. And then we have dorsal vagal, which is when we are immobilized with fear. We're shut down, we're collapsed and in despair. And depending on these three states, these three systems that are taking place, that story is going to shift greatly depending on where you're at in your nervous system. So let's break it down. I'm going to go through all three of these, and we're going to talk about, how the state of our nervous system affects the story in our mind depending on where we're at. So let's get into it. So let's start with the sympathetic system. When we're in a sympathetic state, we are mobilized. We are in fight or flight. And this results in us feeling panicky, fearful, angry, irritated, frustrated, and we're rushing, we're urgently taking action. And so the story that follows a sympathetic state is one that is laced with fear or anger. I lived a lot of my life in a sympathetic state. And as a result, all my thoughts were ones that were just fearful or ones of frustration or rage. And so it's important to note here why your thoughts are doing this. because our thoughts, when we're in a sympathetic state, becomes very extreme. They become catastrophic, and we think there's a lot of urgency that we need to force change along. And so when it comes to mind-body healing or healing neuroplastic pain and symptoms, if we're in a sympathetic state, the thoughts that you're going to have about your pain or symptoms or about your healing are going to be extreme, and they're going to be skewed. And so a lot of times where I see people trying to frantically figure out and fix their symptoms, it's because they're in a sympathetic state. That's what's taking place. Again, story follows state. And so if you're in fight or flight, the thoughts that you're going to be peppered with are ones around fear and ones around anger. So if you're feeling really frustrated about your healing right now, and you view your pain symptoms or physical symptoms as very dangerous and something that you need to force change to happen with, then take note of this, because it's probably that you're in a sympathetic state. Next, let's talk about the dorsal vagal system. When we're in a dorsal vagal state, your nervous system is picking up cues of extreme danger or life threat. And in response, it shifts us to shut down, collapse, immobilize with fear, and we feel hopeless and helpless and dark. Now, the story that follows here is one that's really dark. I've spent periods of my life chronically in a dorsal vagal state, especially at points when I was in chronic pain. And even for myself and many other people, this is where thoughts of suicide will live. Now, as a side note, if you're having thoughts of suicide, make sure you reach out to crisis resources in your area. But this is where they live. The story becomes just one of helplessness and hopelessness, even if that's not the reality. Because at some point in my healing, things shifted. I learned about a mind-body approach. I got hopeful. I shifted to a safe and connected ventral vagal state. And all of a sudden, my story completely changed. Not a whole lot had changed externally in my environment, but my state had shifted. And so when we're in that dorsal vagal state, our pain symptoms can be one that feel really extremely dangerous. We feel dark about them. We feel that no matter what we do, it's hopeless. We're not going to be able to change them. And we feel helpless. Sometimes when we're in the medical system, we feel helpless to make change because no treatment's working. And so the story follows the state here. So if your thoughts are seeming dark or hopeless or helpless, it's likely that you're in this dorsal vagal system. And lastly, let's discuss the ventral vagal system. When we're in a ventral vagal state, we feel connected with the world. We're socially engaged, we're calm, we're at ease, and we're hopeful. And the story that follows is going to match that. It's going to be one that feels very bright. It's going to be one of calmness, even if we are dealing with problems. And the story is going to shift to one of hope. And I've experienced this many times where I've regulated my nervous system and the story just completely shifts. Like if you shift sharply from sympathetic or dorsal to ventral, you're going to really notice that all those thoughts, all those fear-laced, dangerous feeling thoughts are just going to melt away, because all of a sudden we feel regulated in our system and the story shifts. And you'll notice if you're in a ventral vagal state that the thoughts you have about your pain or symptoms will shift greatly too. The thoughts you have about your healing are going to change. Even if we're still having pain or symptoms, we'll realize that we're on the right path, that this sensation is temporary, it's going to pass, and ultimately we're going to be able to heal. And so watch this with yourself, because it's a good sign that you're in a ventral vagal state. So to heal from mind-body concerns, we don't need to change the story. We need to change the state. And by understanding that the story follows the state, we then can actually focus on regulating our nervous system. And by doing this, by becoming regulated more often, our nervous system is then picking up more on cues of safety than on cues of danger. And if pain or physical symptoms are a danger signal that your brain is sending you, then ultimately moving towards a regulated state of safety and connection is going to help you heal. Now, I have a good video on some breathing techniques that we can use to regulate our system and shift to a ventral state that I'll link to the top here that you can check out. So please put your questions or comments down below, hit the like button, and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you all next time. Happy healing.